Overview. Hell's Angels, 1967, by Hunter S. Thompson, is an unfettered first-hand look at one of the most notorious biker gangs in American history. Born in Berkeley, California, the Hells Angels grew in infamy after making headlines for being accused of raping of two underage girls. While the claims turned out to be unsubstantiated, the wild story surrounding the group grew to otherworldly proportions. By the summer of 1965, they were drawing crowds, interviews, and party invites from people who were both terrified and fascinated by the outlaw biker gang. Thompson was sent to cover the Angels as a journalist, but the gang and their lifestyle quickly began to supplement his own. Soon he was drinking all night and riding Harleys alongside Angels like Bagmaster, Scuzzy, and Hype, and witnessing incidents that ended up providing some truth to the gang's beastly reputation. Insights from Chapter 1. 1. The Labor Day run was the biggest event for the Hells Angels. It was a time for drinking, fighting, random fornication, drugs, and overall debauchery. Anywhere from 200 to 1,000 bikers would be in attendance. 2. The emblem of the Hells Angels is a winged skull wearing a motorcycle helmet. Typically, this patch is sewn onto the back of a sleeveless denim jacket. Members normally have long, unkempt hair with a beard to match. Their belts are sometimes motorbike chains that can be used as weapons. 3. By 1965, Oakland was becoming the capital for the Hells Angels. A rival gang, the Diablos, tried to challenge the Angels around this time, even beating up a lone angel. The result was each Diablo being hunted down and beaten one by one, disbanding the group entirely. 4. The Labor Day run in 1964 ended in calamity for the Angels, when several members of the gang were charged with the rape and assault of two girls ages 14 and 15 in Monterey, California. The headlines created disgust and fear nationwide. Insights from Chapter 2. 1. State Senator Fred Farr of Monterey County organized an investigation of the Hells Angels. It included testimonies from attorneys and law enforcement and painted the Angels as absolute monsters. The sensationalized report was widely circulated on national news sources. 2. The Monterey rape case that started the investigation was later found to be based on insufficient evidence. One of the victims refused to testify, and the other gave wholly unreliable testimony. The charges against the gang were dropped, but the negative headlines continued. 3. Often, local eyewitnesses told of much calmer scenes of Hells Angels interactions in their towns and bars, while official police reports seemed wholly focused on the Angels taking over a town by sheer force and numbers, causing havoc. The differences leave the truth up for interpretation. Insights from Chapter 3. 1. New York-based major press platforms such as Time and Newsweek essentially created the cancerous identity of the Hells Angels. Without their articles, the little-known gang in Oakland would have remained far from the public eye. Instead, they were the country's most notorious biker gang. 2. As a result, any minute out on the streets in a Hells Angels jacket was a calculated risk of being harassed or arrested. Even respectable motorcyclists faced an uptick in police harassment. As one police officer put it, the innocent will have to suffer along with the guilty. 3. As their notoriety grew, some Hells Angels began taking advantage of the publicity by agreeing to appear on talk shows, interviews, and photo shoots, so long as money or a party was involved. Around $1,000 was the price discussed for a press member to interview an angel. 4. As he began his assignment covering the Hells Angels, Hunter S. Thompson was careful not to let the members enter his life. This was short-lived, as he routinely spent 2 or 3 days a week at Angels' homes, bars, and parties. His life was slowly absorbed by the gang. Insights from Chapter 4. 1. Another side effect of the notoriety of the Hells Angels was that it hurt their employment picture. Before any of the articles were published, most Angels were working. After the 1964 publicity, that number plummeted to only about one-third of members being employed. 2. When the Angels were employed, they were often sporadically working jobs that would soon be replaced by machines. Most were unskilled and uneducated workers, but the few that did have full-time jobs often had their own homes and were financially stable. 3. The Angels often went back and forth on their response to the media's portrayal of them. While they first had a basic disgust for misrepresenting the truth, once their popularity grew, they were attracted to the media in the hopes of getting paid. Insights from Chapter 5. 1. Pretambobo was a highly regarded angel who was most widely known and feared for his ability to fight others. To become vice president of the gang, he had to fight 7 angels in the span of a week. 2. The Hollister Hill Climb was a local motorcycle event in Hollister, California. On the July 4 weekend in 1947, it drew around 3,000 motorcycle riders from all over the state. The mob grew rowdier and rowdier, almost destroying the town in the process. 3. That 1947 weekend in Hollister inspired the 1954 film The Wild One starring Marlon Brando. The film centered on outlaw bikers, some good and some bad. Many bikers after that film found comfort in relating themselves to Brando's benevolent outlaw character. Insights from Chapter 6. 1. The Angel's sense of retaliation was extreme and did not follow the thinking, an eye for an eye. Any challenge to an angel was a challenge to all angels in the area. If you insulted one, you could expect to fight him and all of his friends at the bar too. 2. Angels often held grudges far longer than police would protect witnesses after a trial. If a bartender's testimony led to the arrest of an angel, that bartender would have to be in constant fear of being beaten up or having his bar trashed following the trial. 3. As the Hells Angels grew in notoriety after 1964, expansion of the gang was inevitable. The only hope of retaining the Angels' image, given the eruption of wannabes across the country, was to selectively expand and hope those newest chapters would scare off other gangs trying to use their name. Insights from Chapter 7. 1. Many motorcyclists take great care in wearing safety helmets and thick leather jackets in case they fall off their bikes and skid on the ground. The Hells Angels wanted nothing to do with safety and refused to wear either of those safety articles. 2. Despite their reputation, there were plenty of stories from bartenders and gas station clerks about their surprisingly friendly encounters with the Hells Angels. Because their reputation was so violent and rough, some angels relished acting with kindness just for the surprise. 3. Some connections can be made between the Hells Angels and latent homosexuality, but to assert that the entire Hells Angels movement was essentially a homosexual phenomenon would be incorrect. Most often, these claims would be made by police to differentiate their reports and shock the public. Insights from Chapter 8. 1. The connection between an angel and his bike was what differentiated them from an average street bum. As one angel put it, love can be defined by anything you love as much as your bike. Angels treated their bikes as just that, something that they love. 2. Many motorcyclists said that their high-speed races were significantly safer than driving on the highway. Unlike a motocross race, where there was a general objective and everyone went in the same direction, the highway had innumerable dangers from drivers of varying prowess, experience, awareness, and physical state. 3. The general outlaw bike was the Harley 74, a truly massive bike that came out of the factory weighing 700 pounds. Angels would tweak it to lower that weight to 500 pounds, then put in a massive engine. 4. While other bikes could go faster and weighed less than the Harley 74, it was a point of pride for Angels to be able to truly master that specific bike. To get maximum performance out of a Harley 74 took significant time, skill, and effort. Insights from Chapter 9. 1. On July 4, 1965, Thompson joined the Hells Angels on a trip to Bass Lake, California, a sleepy resort town near Yosemite National Park. During the week leading up to the event, California police and press were already covering the event and warning Bass Lake citizens to be vigilant. 2. More than a few towns in California had enacted laws purely to target and break up motorcycle gangs. Because there is nothing illegal about riding a motorcycle, some towns would pass laws making it illegal to ride with more than 2 riders at a time. 3. Any arrest for a Hells Angel on a big weekend like the 4th of July would slow the whole group down and force that person to spend the weekend in jail. Thus, careful planning was done to avoid certain troubled towns and create the safest route to Bass Lake. Insights from Chapter 10. 1. While riding up to Bass Lake for July 4th, Thompson heard radio bulletins warning local citizens and any unsuspecting vacationers that the resort town was about to come under siege by the notorious Hells Angels. Police from nearby towns were also warned and were prepared for war. 2. Most months, the Hells Angels kept a somewhat low profile and decently peaceful coexistence with the police. But on these special summer weekends, when multiple Hells Angels chapters were convening, all rules were called off. The biggest runs were on Labor Day and the 4th of July. 3. It was tradition to dress outrageously for these runs. Many dyed their beards bright red or green and wore ridiculous garb reminiscent of Apache warriors or Prussian soldiers. Because the Angels were already outcasts, these runs were celebrations and exemplifications of that social position. Insights from Chapter 11. 1. There was a method to the Hells Angels' madness of riding into towns with hundreds of bikers at a time. Making a scene with only 15 riders would get them arrested every time, but quadrupling that amount demanded respect from police. They received an escort instead of a felony arrest. 2. The authorities up at Bass Lake had constructed a roadblock to keep the Hells Angels away from public campsite areas, funneling them into main county areas. The hope was that in these areas the Angels were far more likely to violate ordinances leading to their arrests. 3. Madera County law enforcement also provided any motorcyclists passing through one of the Bass Lake roadblocks with a 5-page legal document, vaguely explaining why they were not allowed in the area. The main message was clear, however. At the first sign of trouble, any motorcyclist would be arrested. Insights from Chapter 12. 1. The local sheriff in Bass Lake ended up reserving a private campground for the Hells Angels north of town, in an effort to keep them out of it. After a short but tense meeting among a small group of Angels, they decided to go to the campsite. 2. The campsite was in a terrible location, with no access to drinking water. As more Angels went up to the campsite, the angrier the group became. Soon, en masse, the group came barreling down to town, in no mood to talk. 3. Back in Bass Lake, Thompson found armed vigilantes patrolling the streets. Most of them weren't even locals, but outsiders coming in looking for a fight. As he returned to the roadblock, Thompson was surprised to find a meeting between forest rangers and Angels going peacefully. 4. The rangers then provided the Angels with another campsite, which ultimately had everything they needed, except beer. The first crisis of the weekend had been averted. Insights from Chapter 13. 1. Thompson and 2 Angels made a successful beer run into town. They narrowly avoided conflict with vigilantes at one store before finding another market where tourists had congregated, hoping to see the Angels in person. They got the beer cheap, took some photos, and drove back to camp fully stocked. 2. The communication between Hells Angels chapters was surprisingly organized, as they often would have to discuss transactions involving bikes or drugs, meetups, and yearly runs like Bass Lake. Often, chapter presidents would talk over long-distance telephone calls and filter down the information to the rest of the members. 3. While the gang's members were predominantly lower class, many of them came from middle-class families, specifically from families that moved to California just before or after World War II. However, almost all of them had cut ties with family by the time they joined the gang. 4. The defining trait of the Hells Angels was that they were all outsiders, wandering from job to job with little security aside from their fellow members and their bikes. Insights from Chapter 14. 1. There was a small incident outside camp when a lone angel was assaulted by 6 drunk kids, surprising him with a lead pipe over his head. The gash required 6 stitches, each $1, costing him another round of beer and his gas money back to Oakland. 2. While the Angels never shied from a fight, getting arrested was a different story because of the cost of bail. Each chapter had a designated bondsman on call at all times, ready to drive upwards of 200 miles to get a member out of jail. 3. When it came to alcohol, Angels were prone to binge drinking. Rarely did they get drunk at home, but at parties, they raged into madness, screaming incoherencies and fighting one another like it was second nature, which it could be for some of them. 4. The American Motorcycle Association, AMA, often tangled with the Hells Angels. Most AMA riders were annoyed at being associated with outlaws, which normally resulted in extra harassment from police. However, many AMA riders were as mean as the Angels and went out of their way to fight an outlaw. Insights from Chapter 15. 1. The rangers stationed to oversee the Angels at their campsite enforced a 10 p.m. curfew. Nobody in and nobody out. It was supposedly to protect them from any run-ins with the town. The Angels didn't seem to mind, as their beer supply was still strong. 2. After 10 p.m., many of the local girls who had visited wanting to see the Angels up close had already left, leaving just the mamas and the old ladies. Old ladies were seen as steady girlfriends or even wives, whereas mamas were common property for the gang. 3. There were other outlaw biker gangs at Bass Lake as well, including the Satan Slaves and the Jokers, but they kept to themselves. Generally speaking, the Hells Angels Confederation was friendly with all other outlaw gangs, but local chapters often fought constantly with their local outlaw counterparts. Insights from Chapter 16. 1. Hells Angels and the other outlaw gangs were normally wary of being photographed or recorded, because if they were accused of a crime, they would not be able to deny that they were there. The potential threat of incriminating evidence was enough for most outlaws to say no to either. 2. One chapter of the Angels actually carried around business cards. The idea was to aid every motorist they saw alongside the road, and after fixing their car or bike, hand them one of these cards that read, "You have been assisted by a member of the Hells Angels." 3. Around midnight, the beer stash was running low, and there were calls to get more. There was also a runaway boy about 16 years old that had wandered into camp and was asking to go home. The Angels sent Thompson and one angel to take care of both. Insights from Chapter 17. 1. The idea of predatory rapists that hung over the entire Hells Angels organization was always quickly and easily taken up by the media. Any rape accusation against the Angels made headlines, whether it turned out to be true or false. However, the outcome of trials was often never made public. 2. There were many girls that actively sought out the Angels. Some would stay around for a while, switching from guy to guy, while others split quickly. Those that wronged an angel, however, were under the threat of being gang raped. Insights from Chapter 18. 1. There was a tradition among the Angels to never sleep on the first night of a run. This was the case at Bass Lake, and those that did pass out were punished, typically by being peed on. 2. The rest of the weekend went peacefully. Some stayed drinking at the campsite the next day, while others went into town where they were greeted by ogling tourists and even more beer. The headlines were notably absent from any Angels 4th of July stories that next week. Insights from Chapter 19. 1. Police believe that the Angels had a countrywide network of drugs, transporting them from coast to coast in bogus packaging for motorcycle parts. The truth was they did drugs too openly and were too poor for that operation to have been even remotely possible. 2. One of the more common drugs the Angels would use was Benzedrine, often referred to as bennies. They were uppers that were used to stay up later after a day of drinking, but practically any drug was fair game among the group. Insights from chapters 20 to 22. 1. There was a riot in Laconia, New Hampshire, that involved around 10,000 people in June 1965. The media proclaimed it was started by the Hells Angels, rooting the idea that they were expanding to the east. These claims were baseless, with 0 Angels even being arrested. 2. By the summer of 1965, the Angels were practically celebrities in Northern California, regularly being quoted, filmed, and interviewed. Any party worth its name would have to have some Angels in attendance. Thompson, because of his association, was half expected to produce the gang at a moment's notice. 3. It was strange for most of the Angels to be considered heroes by a culture and people that often rejected them and had nothing in common with them. Regardless, they appreciated the great new influx of beer, parties, and women. 4. However, the overexposure of the group slowly went to the Hells Angels' heads. They began to believe what the headlines were telling them, and Thompson's relationship with the gang slowly deteriorated. As Thompson put it, it wasn't as fun to drink with them. Author's style. Hunter S. Thompson does not leave much to the reader's imagination when describing what he heard or experienced with the Hells Angels. He is extremely blunt and constantly wanders back and forth between streams of his own thoughts, wild stories about specific Angels members, and actual facts and statistics from historical events. He also utilizes quotes in every chapter, ranging from respected literary figures to lewd or offensive police officers and Hells Angels members. Author's perspective. Hunter S. Thompson, 1937 to 2005, was an American journalist, author, and counterculture icon. He started the gonzo journalism movement of the 1970s. This was a new style of journalism where reporters made no claims of being objective and instead actively participated in events, which were typically written from their first-person perspective. Thompson first coined the term gonzo journalism in 1970 while covering the Kentucky Derby. Thompson was also well known for his lifelong use of alcohol and illegal drugs. He wrote several other books, including Fear and Loathing in Las Vegas, 1967, The Curse of Llano, 1983, and The Rum Diary, 1998. We hope you enjoyed the insights on Hunter S. Thompson's Hells Angels. Purchase the book to learn more.